Welcome, everyone. Today we're doing a deep dive into a case that, well, it's puzzled people for decades now.
That's right. We're talking about the deaths of Kevin Ives and Don Henry, teenagers down near Alexander, Arkansas, back in 1987.
17 and 16 years old. It's often called the Boys on the Tracks case.
And we've gathered quite a bit of material here. Encyclopedias, news reports, legal docs, even online comments.
What makes this one so compelling looking through these sources is how the story just shifts. It starts one way.
Yeah, with an official explanation, but then layers upon layers of theories, allegations. It gets really complex.
Talk of drug trafficking, potential witnesses, even alleged cover-ups involving some pretty powerful people, or so the sources claim.
So our mission today really is to unpack all that for you. We'll look at the facts as they were presented at different times.
Right, and the controversies, the conflicting accounts you find in these materials.
We're not just summarizing, we're digging into how the story is told through these different sources.
It's a journey, definitely. From an official ruling that got challenged to families fighting for answers.
Independent efforts, dramatic claims popping up years later, and questions that, honestly, still hang in the air.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's see what these sources tell us.
So the sources lay out the timeline. It starts very early, Sunday, August 23rd, 1987, around 4:00 a.m.
And a train crew, Union Pacific, spots something on the tracks near the Crooked Creek Trestle in Alexander.
Yeah, two bodies lying between the tracks, and the crew reported they were wrapped in something, like a pale green tarp. There was also a gun nearby.
And the train, tragically, couldn't stop in time. Ran over the bodies.
The crew reported it immediately, of course. Local and state police show up pretty quickly around 4:40 a.m., start the investigation.
Now here's where, according to the sources, things get odd right away.
It is. Some initial reports suggest local officials were treating it almost like a suicide from the get-go.
Even though the train crew mentioned the bodies being covered, they objected to that suicide idea.
Exactly. And what's really striking in some accounts is that the police, when they arrived, they reported finding no tarp.
Wait, so the crew sees a tarp, reports it, but the police find nothing.
That's what some sources state. They did collect a shattered .22 caliber rifle as evidence, though.
That's a pretty significant inconsistency right at the very beginning, highlighted in these materials.
It really is. And it kind of sets the stage for the next major point, the initial cause of death.
This came from the state medical examiner at the time, Dr. ahmymalak.
Yes. Dr. Malak issued the first official ruling. He said the deaths of Kevin Ives and Don Henry were, quote, two accidental deaths due to THC intoxication.
THC marijuana.
Right. The primary psychoactive compound.
Okay, let me get this straight. The official explanation, based on these sources, was that these two kids smoked so much weed, they basically passed out on active train track.
And didn't react to a train. That was essentially Dr. Malak's initial finding. He blamed it entirely on marijuana influence.
Wow. You can only imagine how the families reacted to that.
Oh, the sources make that crystal clear. The parents, especially Kevin's mother, Linda Ives, they found it completely unacceptable.
They disputed it immediately.
Intensely. They felt it didn't match their sons at all, didn't fit their character, their habits. They started their own digging right away.
What did they say about their son's habits?
Well, Kevin's parents reportedly said they'd never seen him heavily into drugs, never spaced out. Friends apparently said, yeah, maybe they'd share a joint sometimes, but they weren't druggies.
Just typical teenagers.
Described as typical teenagers, yeah, like working on cars, hunting, parties, not the picture painted by the initial ruling.
So the families pushed back hard. And that pushback, it seems from the sources, really drove the narrative forward.
Absolutely. Their determination led them to hire their own experts.
And these experts disagreed with Malak.
Strongly disagreed, according to the reports. They suggested there was evidence of injuries that just weren't consistent with just a train accident.
And this pressure worked.
It did. It led to a change. About 6 months later, February 1988, the official cause of death was reclassified from accidental to undetermined.
Undetermined. Okay, that's a step. But then things shifted again, even more dramatically later that year.
That's right. A grand jury got involved. They reviewed the evidence.
And their conclusion?
They ruled the deaths a probable homicide.
Probable homicide. Wow. That's a huge turn.
Monumental. It meant a legal body believed there was probable cause the boys were murdered, not an accident.
So the whole case, as described in the sources, just flips from tragic accident to potential criminal act.
Exactly. And that pivot from accident to probable homicide, is where the sources show the case exploding into all these complex theories and allegations of cover-ups.
Because if it's homicide, the big questions become why and who did it.
And the dominant theory that comes up again and again across these sources is drugs, that the boys were murdered because they saw something they weren't supposed to see.
Something drug-related.
Yes. The area near Alexander, some commenters and sources describe it as having a history of drug activity back then. Meth labs, grow houses, suggestions of a potential drug ring.
And this drug angle, it gets linked pretty quickly in many theories to the whole Megna, Arkansas situation, doesn't it?
Very much so. The connection to Megna is a recurring theme in a lot of these sources. Allegations that whatever local drug activity was happening was part of this bigger smuggling operation running through Megna Intermountain Municipal Airport.
Menga. That's often linked to barryseal, the pilot.
It is. Barryseal, pilot, DEA informant, reportedly used Megna in the early 80s for smuggling drugs, money, weapons. Some sources link it to supporting the Nicaraguan Contras.
Seal was assassinated, though, right? Before this happened.
Yeah, he was killed in 1986, over a year before Kevin and Don died.
So the theory basically is that the boys somehow stumbled onto a drug drop or something related to that operation near the tracks.
That's a key version you see described. Some sources suggest maybe they were out spotlighting deer, that illegal night hunting with lights, and just happened upon a plane dropping bags of drugs.
Is that the only version?
Another variation suggests maybe they knew about a potential drop and were actually trying to steal the cocaine.
It's interesting, though. Looking through the sources, even the descriptions of the alleged Megna operation itself aren't perfectly consistent.
No, you definitely see conflicting details, like popular depictions, think the movie American Made, show Seal dropping bags from planes. But some sources argue Seal mostly used Louisiana for drops before he died in '86, even if he was based in Megna.
Right.
So it shows how details from this larger alleged operation get kind of woven into the theories about the boys' deaths, and sometimes the details shift depending on the source.
But okay, regardless of the exact mana mechanics or the precise timeline, the core theory is boys encounter big-time drug trafficking.
Yes. And this is where specific names, allegations against officials really start popping up in the sources. Figures like the Saline County prosecutor at the time, danharmon, he's mentioned repeatedly, often linked to alleged drug involvement himself.
Right.
Even accused later of threatening investigators looking into the case.
And other law enforcement officers, too, implicated in some theories.
Yes. There's a particularly harrowing theory detailed in some sources involving two Pulaski County Sheriff's deputies, Jay Campbell and Kirk Lane.
What does that theory claim?
Well, this narrative suggests the boys maybe saw something drug-related, fled the scene, and then ran into Campbell and Lane near a place called the Ranchette grocery store.
And then?
In this version, the officers allegedly attacked the boys, put them in a police car, and later placed their bodies on the tracks, after stabbing Don and beating Kevin unconscious.
That's incredibly specific and disturbing.
It is. And it's worth noting, some sources point out Jay Campbell was later convicted and jailed on unrelated charges. Though his conviction was reportedly reversed, he was resentenced, then released.
The sources also mention quite a few witnesses, don't they? Whose accounts are used to back up parts of these different theories.
That's right. You have people like Shirley Raper, an EMT. She reported seeing 3 men near the tracks right after the bodies were found, claiming they were volunteer firemen.
But they weren't.
Turned out they weren't firemen. And one of them reportedly later pleaded guilty to cocaine distribution.
Okay, who else?
Then there's Charlene Wilson, reportedly Harmon's girlfriend at the time. Her story, as described in the sources, changed dramatically over the years, at one point claiming she participated in the murders, then saying she was forced to confess that, then later giving yet another different statement about what she saw near the tracks. Very inconsistent.
Okay. Tangled.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Tommy Niehaus claimed he saw Harmon, Keith McCaskill, and James Freddie Poe in a group the boys supposedly stumbled upon. Ronnie Goodwin reported seeing 2 police officers attacking 2 teenagers near that Ranchette grocery store around 2:30 a.m. that night. Descriptions reportedly matched Campbell and Lane and their car.
It really sounds like, just reading through the source material, a very tangled web. Alleged participants, conflicting witness accounts.
It does. And there's another significant theory mentioned, coming from a witness named Kathy Brighttop, who testified to a grand jury.
What was her account?
She claimed her ex-boyfriend, Paul Criswell, admitted involvement. Said he and others, including a James Calloway, hunted the boys down after they tried to steal cocaine from Calloway.
And what did they allegedly do?
took them to a shack, beat Kevin, stabbed Don, then put them on the tracks. Calloway was also considered a suspect by some. He apparently made a weird comment about the boys being beaten before that detail was widely known.
Were Criswell or Calloway ever charged in the murders?
No, not in connection with the murders, though they faced other drug charges. And interestingly, some sources note that Linda Ives, Kevin's mother, reportedly didn't believe this specific group was responsible for her son's death.
So, okay, just summarizing what the sources present. Theories about witnessing a drug drop, theories about trying to steal drugs, specific allegations against named individuals, including law enforcement, people linked to drugs.
Right. And all of this stands in just stark contrast to that initial ruling of accidental death.
Absolutely. And this huge gap from official accident to grand jury homicide to all these detailed alternative theories that seems to directly fuel the accusations of official cover-ups that you see all over the source material.
Definitely. The sources repeatedly bring up claims that law enforcement officials, local, state, maybe even federal, helped cover up not just the crime, but the alleged drug ring behind it.
And that initial ruling by Dr. Malak, the medical examiner, that's often pointed to as Exhibit A in the alleged cover-up.
It often is, though it's interesting. Some sources offer a slightly different take. Maybe Malak wasn't intentionally covering up this specific crime, but was perhaps just appallingly incompetent.
But politically protected.
Politically protected by state officials, which allowed his questionable ruling in this case, and others, to stand initially.
So it shows how complex the accusations get in the sources. Was it malice? Incompetence? A mix?
Right. But what is consistent across the sources is the strong perception that the initial official process failed badly.
What about more formal investigations? Beyond the local police and that grand jury finding, did federal agencies ever step in seriously?
Well, the FBI did join the investigation in December 1993. Some early reports suggested they were suspicious that law enforcement might have been involved in a cover-up.
Okay, so they looked into...
They did, but they officially closed their investigation in November 1995. And one source reports an FBI agent actually told Linda Ives that the boys hadn't been murdered at all.
Seriously? Back to square one? Or even worse, maybe?
For the families, yeah. Imagine hearing that after a grand jury had already ruled probable homicide. Incredibly frustrating. It felt like official channels just kept hitting dead ends or reverting back to explanations they just couldn't accept.
And Linda Ives, Kevin's mother, she just kept fighting, didn't she? The sources portray her as absolutely relentless.
Absolutely. The sources detail her incredible efforts over years, decades even, filing Freedom of Information Act requests, FOIA requests in 2012, 2016.
That's the law letting people request government documents, right?
Exactly. She asked various federal and state agencies for everything they had related to the case.
Did she get much? Did it lead to breakthroughs?
Well, the sources really emphasize how little she got back compared to what was believed to exist. One source says she only received about 2,000 pages total, heavily redacted, blacked out.
Only 2,000.
Yeah, and what's often highlighted is the allegation that there are still supposedly 14,600 pages of FBI documents related to the case that remain unreleased or at least heavily redacted. A huge information gap, according to these accounts.
Wow. 14,000 pages. She even sued to try and get the information right.
Yes, she sued the U.S. government in 2016 when agencies didn't turn over complete documents, and a federal judge did order some agencies, the U.S. Attorney's Office, DEA, Homeland Security, to turn over relevant documents in 2017.
But ultimately?
Ultimately, her lawsuits were dismissed, including one in 2019, and she reportedly said that even in the documents she did get released, she found nothing that directly linked officials to the murders, just reinforcing that sense of unanswered questions despite all her efforts.
So even decades later, the search goes on, and new claims kept surfacing, sometimes really explosive ones, adding more layers. The sources mention a former pro wrestler coming forward, Billy Jack Haynes.
Ah, yes, that was in January 2018. Billy Jack Haynes made this, well, dramatic claim, said he actually witnessed the murders back in '87.
Witnessed them? How?
He alleged he was working security for a cocaine drop that night, hired by some unnamed Arkansas criminal politician. He claimed he saw law enforcement officials murder the boys and admitted he helped move their bodies onto the tracks.
That is an incredibly specific and serious claim. How is that received? Did people believe him, according to the sources?
Well, according to several sources, including statements attributed to Linda Ives herself, Haynes was generally not seen as credible, not by many close to the case or familiar with the evidence.
Why not?
It's noted that a lot of the information he gave was apparently already out there online in forums and things. He also allegedly changed key parts of his story over time and made other really sensational claims,
Like what?
like saying the same politician asked him to kill David Kennedy back in 1984. He also publicly tried to link the Boys on the Tracks case to the death of Seth Rich and the whole Clinton body count conspiracy theory.
Okay. Which brings us inevitably, perhaps, to the most politically charged part of this whole thing, mentioned in the sources and commentary.
Exactly. Quite a few sources, especially you see this in online comments and some specific articles referenced, they directly connect this case to really high-profile political figures. Bill and Hillary Clinton, Roger Clinton, Oliver North, Ronald Reagan, the CIA.
The names get thrown around a lot in the context of wider conspiracy theories, like the Clinton body count or alleged massive government corruption and drug running.
And look, it's really crucial for us to state here as we talk about this, these are serious allegations and theories presented in the source material we reviewed.
Right. We're just reporting what's in those sources, the different viewpoints expressed. We are absolutely not endorsing any specific political claim ourselves. Our job is just to show you what the sources say.
Absolutely. And it's important to see that the sources themselves show really starkly conflicting views on this political aspect.
How so?
While some commenters, some articles, they strongly assert Clinton involvement is fact. Part of this big alleged network involving MENA, the CIA, cocaine, weapons money.
But others?
Others dismiss those claims just as strongly, call them ridiculous, preposterous, idiotic bandwagon stuff, asserting that any claims of Clinton involvement have been completely debunked.
So a real divide in the sources themselves.
Yeah. You even see nuance within the criticism, like some commentary we saw, I think it was on a Reddit discussion, acknowledged that the alleged menaairport drug smuggling itself was very real and spanned two administrations, meaning Reagan and Bush Sr., but they called the specific Clinton body count angle absurd.
So even within the materials on this one case, you get this huge spectrum from firm belief in high-level political conspiracy and cover-up to complete dismissal of those specific theories as totally unfounded.
That's right. The sources really map out this landscape of intense conflicting claims. It reflects the sheer depth and breadth of speculation that can rush in when official answers aren't accepted or seem incomplete.
And it just highlights, doesn't it, the immense challenge of navigating a case like this one, where the initial official story was pretty quickly undermined.
Right, by subsequent findings, by independent experts.
Leading to this explosion of alternative theories, often fueled by these really serious allegations of corruption and this persistent feeling of a lack of transparency or just incomplete information.
The story, when you read it through these sources, it's as much about the family's, especially Linda Ives, determined decades-long fight for answers and accountability, as it is about the mysterious deaths themselves.
Yeah.
It really highlights the hurdles they faced, getting information, challenging official rulings, and just the enduring mystery around Kevin and Dawn's last hours.
Wow. Okay. This deep dive into the Boys on the Tracks, it certainly shows a long, winding, and often frustrating road.
Doesn't it? We went from that initial, heavily disputed, accidental death ruling
Through a grand jury finding probable homicide.
and then into decades of alternative theories, investigations piling up, legal fights, dramatic new claims, all based on the sources we've looked at.
We've seen how these sources present the official findings right alongside these persistent allegations. Drug trafficking networks, potential witnesses with varying accounts.
Claims of official corruption, cover-ups involving law enforcement, maybe politics, all tangled up with that controversial initial medical examiner's ruling and the investigations that followed.
And the story, as it's told across these sources, it really shines a light on the family's incredible fight for truth. The sheer difficulty of getting complete information, especially from official sources.
And just the enduring, profound mystery surrounding what happened to Kevin Ives and Donhenry on those tracks back in 1987.
Even now, decades later, after all the investigations, the lawsuits, these dramatic, often disputed claims that have emerged.
The core question just hangs there, doesn't it? What really happened on those train tracks in 1987? And who was responsible?
This whole story, as it unfolds through these sources, it really raises a big question for you listening when the official explanations are contested like this.
Yeah, when information seems incomplete or it's heavily redacted.
And this vacuum opens up, filled with all these numerous, sometimes conflicting alternative theories and allegations, especially ones involving potential high-level corruption.
Okay.
How do you even begin to approach trying to understand what might have happened?
What stands out to you from this deep dive into the Boys on the Tracks case and this whole complex landscape of information and theory and unanswered questions surrounding it?